85% of Indian districts are extreme event hotspots. 45% of our Indian districts are showcasing a swapping trend. Traditional flood prone areas are becoming drought prone areas are becoming flood prone, and some districts are witnessing flood and drought simultaneously. So, any restoration needs a lot of effort. What is lost, if you are not able to restore, then it is lost forever. And nature has this adaptability within itself that if you want to abuse it, it will let you abuse it, but it will give you back in form of cyclone, flood, droughts, heat waves, so on and so forth. I think what we have missed out as a country is we have always looked at a banded approach, and as a result, we haven't been able to heal any of our wounds, whether it is education, health, or kind of manufacturing or jobs, right? That banded approach needs to shift. We need to look at permanent healing solutions. And I think the sooner we start that, we are already in the path, but we need to first track it, because the devil that lies in the room is becoming more harsher, more incessant, more erratic, and more is pushing us back.
So, hello again to the Carbon Circle. Namaste. Uh, the Welcome to the Carbon Circle, the podcast by Carbon Mandal Sustainability Consulting Services, where we have honest, meaningful conversations with people shaping India's low carbon future. I'm your host Roshan Rai, founder of Carbon Mandal. Our mission is simple: to help build sustainable Bharat by 2047 by making climate risk, ESG, and circularity core to how businesses and governments take decision. My guest today is Abinash Mohanty, Global Sector Head in Climate Change and Sustainability at IPE Global. Abinash leads IPE Global's climate change and sustainability practice, working across Indian states and multiple countries on climate risk assessment, policy design, and low carbon pathways. Before IPE Global, he co-authored one of India's first district level climate vulnerability assessments, which showed that over 80% of Indians live in districts highly exposed to meteorological disasters. He and his team have since developed the Climate Readiness Index, a data driven framework that scores states on three pillars: systemic or policy readiness, technology readiness, and financial readiness for low carbon, climate resilient growth. In this conversation, we are going to explore one, how India moved from mapping vulnerability to measuring readiness; two, what the latest data tells us about which states are pulling ahead and which are at risk of being left behind; three, the economics of climate readiness, what it means for state budgets, investors, and businesses, and what a climate ready Bharat actually looks like by 2047 on the ground. The big question we are asking today is, are Indian states climate ready for Viksit Bharat 2047, and what will it take to get there? Abinash, welcome to the Carbon Circle. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Roshan. My pleasure as well. And thank you for doing this. I know a lot of these conversations within the climate domain has always been complex graphs and maps, and probably that's the reason some of us working closely with the Indian International Panel on Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, we always have tried and made efforts in terms of breaking it down, making it more climate science more palatable. Thank you for doing that. Climate science need to be more palatable, need to be Aam Aadmi's language, and then only it can lead to Viksit Bharat.
Absolutely. I think I'm with you on that. And I think we have the right guest today to be talking on a topic of climate risk and the climate readiness in this time where we are now talking about El Nino, right? So I believe we are going to have a very interesting conversation today. But before that, uh, I would want to kick off with this question. When you look back at your journey from doing vulnerability mapping at district level to now leading climate change and sustainability at IPE Global, what's the thread that ties it all together for you personally? What was the moment when climate risk stopped being an abstract research topic and became your life's work, Abhinash?
Well, before mapping the climate vulnerability across Indian districts, climate risk had touched me at a very young age. When I was technically a teenager, 1999 super cyclone happened. And when 1999 super cyclone happened in Odisha, I was in Bhubaneswar, and I could feel what did a super cyclone look like? What
Mhm.
is basically a climate risk, and how is it going to impact lives, livelihood, infrastructures, and economies? Right? I have seen how the asbestos sheet in our house premise just like flew
You
away.
off.
Yeah, flew off in couple of hours.
Yeah.
How a bigger tree where we used to get fruits, mangoes, just fell off. And apparently, the place in Bhubaneswar where I stay is just adjacent to my home. There's a huge park where people come in for walking, and it's a dharovar of so many old trees, one after the other trees were falling. The cards as they fall in, that was the scenario. And the aftermath of 1999 super cyclone, you being in the capital city, one of the better lived off places within Bhubaneswar, you don't have access to electricity. We never had access to electricity post 1999 super cyclone, 29th October. I still remember the date. When for 2 months we never had electricity. The water was a problem. Getting into basic groceries, vegetables was a problem. And the more we had relatives and our extended family staying across some of the epicenter of the cyclone places. If you take down few packets of Parle-G biscuit, people
Mhm.
will be running after your life to get those biscuits. That's
Yeah.
what was the whole districts were cut off, let alone anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. What I feel is certain experiences that would have stayed early on in our lives lead to something more meaningful, or it could lead to something more disastrous. In your case, perhaps something that could have been a trauma for life led you to take up an initiative or take up a role that rather solves that problem. Would you feel so?
Well, it wasn't a trauma, to be very correct and truthful and honest about it. It wasn't a trauma because I could hardly see. All I could see is a lot of things getting scattered and
Right.
shattered all of a sudden. But yes, that stayed with me, and I became an accidental climate scientist. I was here when I started working in the environment space. I was more into water impacts and other kind of water issues. That's where I started learning out of curiosity, how does these climate models do work? And
Mhm.
I found somebody, a senior professor, who I just walked up to and I said, "What is this? I just want to know about." And that professor asked me to know more. And then at midnight, I started experimenting with climate models because you never had servers. And IIT Delhi had that infrastructure. I was here in IIT Delhi for a couple of months during that time,
Mhm.
doing some here and there projects as a visiting fellow there. And then at that same time, and because I had to go back to US for my larger curriculum that I was involved in during my fellowship. So that made me in terms of accidentally learning climate modeling. And the moment I started knowing about climate models, I said, boss, these are not just numbers. These numbers tell a story about a rickshaw puller. This number tells a story about manufacturing, about a construction worker. This tells about maternal child health. These numbers tell story about our growth trajectory. And these numbers, if you sum it up, that's where the rising attributional sciences, and few of us in India are practicing practitioners of attributional sciences.
Right.
Just to keep it down, attributional sciences is largely if there is 45 degrees outside, how is it going to impact you, Roshan, is going to impact me differently and to different communities, different clusters. So that's where the concept of hypergranular risk assessments do come in.
Mhm.
So risk and readiness are two sides of a same coin. So you have
Yeah.
to be very much aware what are the risks you are getting in and how ready are you to face it and come back and build back better as soon as.
Absolutely.
And that's the life philosophy. So climate model runs on life philosophies as well.
Yeah. But when you mention that data talks stories, it leads to my next question, Abinash, because you have worn multiple hats as a researcher, policy advisor, and now global sector head leading an implementation focused practice at IPE Global. So, when you were co-authoring the district level climate vulnerability assessment, what were the data points or stories from the field that changed how you think about climate risk in India, Abinash? Were there stories that affected you or impacted you very deeply?
Of course, but by general, I'm very optimistic about things happening. In general, my life's philosophy is largely optimistic. What and through climate vulnerability, and this might become a headline that I was pretty optimistic about the climate vulnerability when my discussions went on. And I found, and I was leading that study, and my team and I, we were working, and as a lead author, I need to be double sure, triple sure about the numbers we are putting in, because there are going to be a lot of political practice now, a lot of implications that are going to be
Yeah.
happening, and any research we put out has to be well peer reviewed. So we had got very good people who have been practicing for 30 odd years, their life on climate science. They reviewed
Hmm.
those numbers. When those numbers came in, 85% of Indian districts are extreme event hotspots. What interesting hypothesis I had, and this was a dated back hypothesis I had, that flood prone areas are becoming drought prone areas are becoming flood prone. And that's where the conversation started, that do wait, pause. It is not just the climate risk which is getting harsher, groomer, and grimmer. It is also about the larger kind of climate risk landscape, which is also changing. It is quite dynamic in
Hmm.
that way, and that is where the swapping trend is something that we coined in that study, where we found that 45% of our Indian districts are showcasing a swapping trend. Traditional flood prone areas are becoming drought prone areas are becoming flood prone, and some districts are witnessing flood and drought simultaneously, the bigger districts. And this was first hand experience from the fields that I had always in my mind. So that hypothesis was one. But when the numbers were so starky, one thing I had in my mind, and that came down again dating back to the 1999 super cyclone, when communities were coming together. And I am a firm believer that India is diversified, and its core strength is also that diversification. And
Right.
the core values that we have within our communities, we have a lot of solutions. We don't need always solutions coming down from global
From the
north,
West.
or from central governments, or from state governments. We communities, we know, as inhabitants of a particular community, we know how to navigate,
Hmm.
in terms of odds, in terms of goods, in terms of bads, in terms of whatever it is, right? We know how to adapt, and we adapt quite faster. That's what. And I always had that communities have those stories, which are way powerful than these climate science numbers. And we went to validate those numbers, that these are the vulnerable districts, but what are the best practices? And
Right.
that theory stayed with us. A community of women, self-help group women, coming together to restore a forest altogether that was smashed down by the 1999 super cyclone, just by voluntarily contributing it. Communities in Maharashtra, this was in Odisha, the communities in Maharashtra coming together to make them aware of how much of climate, coastal inundation is going to happen, so that we are all advanced. There are communities of practice who are looking at in terms of how does the movement of ant tell us when is it going to rain, right?
Right.
Yeah, when is the rain going to happen? So all of those communities coming together to fight climate change by large, and fight in terms of taking it forward, is a very interesting story to take
Yeah.
it up. And that's where the positivity comes down, that every time we think that we are going to do a top to bottom approach in terms of solving climate change or mitigating the risk of climate change, and often ignore that communities are already aware. Our
Yeah.
food system, our lifestyle, of our inhabitation, in our habitation styles, everything is sustainable. We just have adapted to a Western life, to a global North life, without thinking of the implication. And that's where we went wrong. because we
Yeah,
never
yeah.
branded our dharawar of traditional knowledge, and that's where we missed the buzz.
Yeah, I again agree on that fact that simply copy pasting the solutions prescribed to the West is just not always something that works here in India. But the numbers are it kind of brings about alarm, because when you say 80% of people reside, or rather 85% of people in India reside in districts that are highly vulnerable to climate change, which means India already hosts 20% of the global population, around 140 crore people. So that's like putting risk of so many lives at risk. So that's something that we got to be aware of. I mean, though you have an optimistic lens on the entire thing, given that the communities have such an inbuilt, or rather an habitual way of adapting to the changing climates. But the other fact that you also mentioned, the parts which were previously prone to floods are now prone to droughts. The entire way of addressing the issue also has to be switched. Maybe the communities have to rework their way of looking at or carrying their everyday activities. My next question, just as a follow up to this, is this: that how did that insight shape your conviction that India needed something like a climate readiness index at the state level? Because that is something that you worked on.
Okay. Let me, in a climate space, there are three terminologies that we work on. One is adaptation. Climate risk or disaster signs are part of those adaptation and resilience thematic area that we work on. Climate readiness, sorry, the second one is climate mitigation. The third
Mitigation.
one is adaptation mitigation co benefits, right? The climate vulnerability index was more of a climate risk assessment or study, whereas climate mitigation is more on the low carbon pathways, right? I never wanted or never was fascinated by the idea that you have to bucket it. At the end of the day, whether you emit more carbon or you manage floods, at the end of the day, it is community who are at risk and at loss.
Hmm.
So whatever you want to bucket it, you can bucket it. But at the end of the day, it is the impact is kind of hitting us, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the India had announced in the Glasgow COP. India has announced its net zero to become 2070. And
2070.
yeah, India is going to become net zero by 2070. That's what is the announcement. And then the hypothesis was, if you have to cut down on your emissions, then you'll have to understand how much, because a lot of work within the climate space is always centered around heavy modeling.
Hmm.
The kind of modeling that we do, even in the climate risk or meteorological or climatological modeling, to bring it into attributional science interface is something is also heavy modeling heavy. The mitigation one is also there, and mitigation is even complicated as well, because you have to look at you have to look at sectors, and every sector is distinct, every geographies
It's distinct.
are distinct, and then on top of it, there is also the carbon sink, which is not unlimited, right? Everything is limited. So it is again a very complex problem. A lot of people are were trying to address those complex problems, but given that, and that's where the interdisciplinarity comes in. What problem are we solving? One of the problem that I found within the climate space has been lying with us as scientists and practitioners of being very happy within the space of publishing good papers,
Yeah.
filing patents, and not breaking it down to the larger communities.
Correct.
And that's where we have gone wrong. Then comes, if you don't break it down and very happy within your own silo, what happens is media never picks it up, because media needs some sort of sensationalism coming in together. And
Yeah.
then the largest pillar of any developmental theory is your governance structures. Now, governance structure, what happens is, um, your governments are made in a 5 year time scale. You
Hmm.
never know which government is going to replace you next in the sixth year, right? It might be a repeat, it might be a continuation, it might be a change all over. So whatever long term plans you're making, you have to break it down into those 5 years, 2 years, and 1 year kind of time scale. Your budgets are made in a 1 year time frame.
Yeah.
Your actions are made, your governments are there in a 5 year time scale. And the hypothesis was plain and simple. If India has to become net zero by 2070, then its top 10 emitting states need to be ready systemically. What
Yeah.
kind of policy, action plan, and others that's required? That's the system readiness. Second is technological readiness, because any problem you are as complex as a low carbon pathways problem, you will have to have a technological embedded. You can't solve it only with traditional way of living or writing. Or staying it together, and the growth as well.
Yeah.
If India is an aspiring country, we have an aspiration of becoming a 5 trillion economy, then development is going to come in. But is that development just enough? Is that development low carbon pathway driven? Right? To what extent? I know 100% is a bullish idea to be around. We
Yeah.
cannot become 100% net zero to achieve all our developmental, but can we maintain that thin balance? And
Mm.
that's where technologies are required. Now, if you have got a right policy, right action plan, right technology, then do we have the right finances in place? And that's where it comes down to the SFT framework that defines the overall climate readiness.
Mm-hmm.
As
Mm-hmm.
data scientists, we often have this habit of overlaying one data layer with the other and
Other.
coming with the bigger story. What does the Gujarat story look like for low carbon pathways vis-a-vis to Andhra story, vis-a-vis to Odisha story, vis-a-vis to Maharashtra story, and can all of these stories be stitched together into India's climate ready story, and hence the net zero story? And that's where climate readiness came
Yes.
in,
Index.
because that helps us in terms of understanding that if today Gujarat is top in terms of systems, then it needs right kind of technology, because it also has got finances. There might be state like Odisha where some tweaking is required in systems, but a lot
Mm-hmm.
of finances is required. In Maharashtra, there is some amount of finances, but we need right kind of technology. Then comes intersectionality of our startup, of our Viksit Bharat agenda, of our agenda of 5 point agenda by the state governments, by the national government, and then boil it down into the district regions, right? You have got
Yeah.
aspirational districts. Are your aspirational districts ready? Are
Correct.
your aspirationals and sunflower sector or emerging sectors ready? Right? How much of jobs growth and sustainability are being addressed through this readiness? And that's where readiness, climate readiness index tells you,
Index.
also tells you, the climate readiness index also tells you the story of how in next 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, what tweaking is required. It's a dynamic kind of tool that helps in terms of taking those decisions.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating that when you simplify such a complicated aspect into a few numbers, right? And it is good in a way to communicate to different states. That is layering the vulnerability index on top of the readiness index with different parameters that is at play. And I genuinely believe that this will help states and countries alike, in this case, India, to move forward by taking decisions which are more meaningful, which is keeping people at the core of it, the communities at the core of it. Uh, my next question is again a follow-up to this, Abinash. That is, if you had to articulate the big idea, I think you just spoke about that idea to me in the previous answer that you provided. Uh, One sentence that explains what you're trying to do for India's climate pathway, what would that sentence be?
Well, one sentence would be aligning low carbon pathways into Viksit Bharat. If in
Right.
Viksit Bharat needs to be low carbon Atmanirbharta, right? You need to find out that Atmanirbharta through low carbon pathways, where you are addressing the trinity of jobs, growth, and sustainability. And more importantly, you are not over exploiting. Unfortunately, the environment is already, or our natural resources are over exploited, but you are trying to
Yeah.
restore, rehabilitate, and rejuvenate them.
Yeah. I mean, when we aspire to be a 5 trillion economy, it definitely comes at certain cost. But what you're mentioning right now is how can we do it in the most effective way as possible, keeping the impact on the environment as minimal as possible. That is what you're referring to as low carbon pathways. Great,
And
Abhinash.
just to add
Yeah,
on to it, Roshan, is whatever is lost, how do we start revitalizing them,
regenerating.
rejuvenating them, and restoring them? That is important, right?
Absolutely.
So any restoration needs a lot of effort. What is lost, if you are not able to restore, then it is lost forever. And nature has this adaptability within itself that if you want to abuse it, it will let you abuse it, but it will give you back in form of cyclone, flood, droughts, heat waves, so on and so forth. But if you want to restore it, then you will see your cyclones and floods are becoming pleasant rainfalls. Your
Yeah.
heat waves turning down into summer evenings that we used to have in our childhood, when you walk out, have some ice creams, have some cold jaljeera ampanna drinks, right? That's what is the thin balance you need to maintain.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke of those during lunchtime, so so yes, but very true. I think it's important that you also add that element into the very foundational aspect that you just spoke about. But Abhinash, my feeling is this. I mean, so far we have introduced terminologies that perhaps are a little more advanced. So for our listeners, Abhinash, who could be business leaders or policy leaders who hear the terms like vulnerability index, readiness index, net zero pathways, could you explain in simple terms the difference between climate vulnerability and climate readiness, and why do we have to measure both?
Okay, let me try to explain it through an example. Um, you start from your house and you need to reach your office, and in between you have a stretch. If your total office stretch is of around 5 kilometers, 1.5 kilometer is a bumpy road, right?
Right,
That bumpy road is such a bad road, that you need to be double, triple cautious of it. Now you're driving your bike. It is inevitable that, or you're driving your car, it is inevitable that there might be high likelihood of an accident, right?
right.
But vulnerability defines, even if there is an accident, whether you just clean up yourself, go back to office or go back to home, or you end up into an hospital where you again get yourself treated in OPD, or you end up in an ICU, right?
Mm,
That's what is vulnerability. Degree of how much of impact am I going to be tells you about your vulnerability and to what extent you are vulnerable. And believe me, each individual uh, human being is differently vulnerable. Each sectors are differently vulnerable. Each country is differently vulnerable. Within India, each state is differently vulnerable. Each district, each block, each village. Now comes question: if even if it's an ICU case, am I going to crematorium, or am I building myself better? That's where the
mm-hmm.
readiness comes in. How do I build back better, which is more sustainable, which is more economically driven, and which is generating more jobs, growth, and sustainability narrative all together, not one at a time? That's what readiness is all about, right? And it's a complex term because people within the climate space have been trying to work largely in terms of either we address how the problem is going to be, how
Mm-hmm.
worse and grimmer it is going to be, and people have been working on the solution side, right? So the problem and solution sides have always been different.
Yeah.
Again, let alone the adaptation and mitigation side of the stories. There are few practitioners who work within. We didn't want it to be bucketed. At least at IPE Global, what we do is whatever we are doing, is it driving on ground action? Couple of years back, we did a larger program which is called as ICRG, Inclusive Climate Growth and Resilience, where we were trying to do a climate proofing of Manrega, the now BG Ramji kind of program. which
Mm-hmm.
has been renamed. So there are assets which have been built at community level, block level, village level, and under Manrega. Are they climate proof? How much
Mm.
of those assets are going to withstand these climate shocks? How much of more jobs are they going to generate? Alternate livelihoods. That's where the story is a more powerful story, because at on ground, until unless you move the needle, this is always going to be a 30,000 fit conversation, good conference of party conversation, good
Yeah.
webinar, good podcast, good newspaper stories and news stories, but the real
Action
action
on
lies
ground.
on ground. And that on ground action need to be driven not by buckets, but once you bring it into a palatable format, into a public policy problem, once you make it a public policy problem backed by empirical evidence, and then solutions backed by empirical evidence also. Now
Yeah.
solutions, as in the climate readiness, tells you if there is a sustainable low carbon solar panel, then that sustainable low carbon solar panel is going to a generate more energy, but at the same time is also going to generate more livelihood, and
Hmm.
c, it is also bringing our making our societies more inclusive, because a, you are trying to address the problem of energy insecurity as well, and second, in terms of a heavy rainfall, that
Hmm.
solar panel is going to help you in terms of not losing out on power, right?
Right.
So it's a circular inclusive story that that needs a connecting of the dots, and often late what we do is we do those dots in silos, and that's where the whole narrative is missed. You can't be just highlighting the problems. I believe strongly you need to be the solution, and the solution lies within us in terms of
Yeah.
what problem and what solution by what time frame it's going to
Right.
minimize the impact.
Right. Um, Again, I mean, I agree on that part because looking at a problem in silos does not lead to real actions on ground. So identifying the problems is important, but at the same time, matching those problems with the solutions and looking at it from a systems perspective. I believe that is what you're referring to. Right. So you're giving me a good segue to the next part of the conversation, which is looking at the data itself. So we will look at the climate readiness index uh, and try zooming into the data here, Abinash. So your earlier work showed that how climate impacts and vulnerabilities are distributed across districts and states. With the climate readiness index, you're now holding up a mirror how to prepare or how states are to prepare on policy, technology, and finance that can actually respond to real on ground problems, right? So my first question in this segment is this: that how do you score states on the three pillars that you mentioned, that is policy, technology, and financial readiness? How do you score them?
So it's a massive study of around 163 odd indicators
Wow.
combined all together, which
Mm.
includes amount of solar adoption, amount of money spent on each of these schemes, what is the allocation, how many professionals are trained, so on and so forth. 163 bucketed under all of them combined together. Now these indicators are need to be normalized, right? You need to compare apples with apples.
Apples.
That's where the communities and what is the population density, what is the area available for a particular district, what is the growth trajectory, what is the gross district domestic product. So it's a combination of climate science, economic modeling, socio-economic modeling, and then more importantly, how do you create the pathways for public policy in
Hmm.
top of it. So it's an interdisciplinary model which was developed through indicators, and those indicators have been given up. Now, I'll give you a very small example, try to simplify it. Now, uh, if you have got fever of around 104, then you will have probably three paracetamols,
Right.
right? If you have
Strong
got
definition.
fever around 100, then you will have probably one paracetamol each day, right?
Hmm.
That's how the doses work.
Yeah.
And this climate readiness model is around that. Whether it's a 104 ICU stage or it's a 100 mile seasonal change, what kind
Yeah.
of dose of action is required within those systems technology and finance. Again, system technology and finance framework was available, but bringing system technology and finance into public policy as complex as a climate action is very was some amount of work that we did. At least that's where I think we have that expertise in terms of making it a level playing field. Right now, what climate readiness will also do is what are these conversations, right? Our pool of money is also not unlimited. We know what
Mm.
resources are there, but how do you prioritize between those resources, right? First, in order to prioritize, if a state already has got a policy, then please start implementing them. You will find
Mhm.
results. And there are prudent of very forward thinking policies which are already available. PM Surya Ghar Yojana. Um, the narratives which have been built around those programs are actually helping communities, helping societies, and helping us as a country in terms of shifting the narrative
Right.
from being a consumer to a producer, right?
Mm.
And when you have a right balance between demand and supply and production and consumption, I think that's where 50% of your battle is won, right?
Right.
That should not be a mismatch. The once you have a mismatch, you are going to have serious issues, and that's
Issues.
where we happen, right?
Yeah.
So let's try to break it down in terms of those mismatches. In terms of, if there are many policies, but you don't have any action on ground, what is the point
Mm.
of having that policy? What is
Right.
stopping you, right? One of the major issues that was highlighted within the assessment or while devising the climate readiness index was it missed out on a lot of capacity gaps. We have got good capacity at national level, at even state level also.
Mhm.
But when you boil it down, right,
Sorry
those
to interrupt you there. I mean, can you give a little more sort of depth into what you mean by capacity?
absolutely, I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
So now, a little trivial question: if you have got PM Surya Ghar Yojana and you have got 10 lakh solar units to be installed, do you
Hmm.
have the capacity maybe to install it? But do you have the capacity as a skill, as a workforce, to
Mm.
manage and maintain them? What kind of training are we giving them? Is it
Mm.
right time? Are our pedagogies that much oriented? Unfortunately, no. There is a huge mismatch, right?
Right.
Where does it start? It starts with school level education, then PUC level education, and then you have technical. You find out your streams, right?
Hmm.
Let's stick to the ITIs. Now, our ITIs need to be strengthened with the emerging low carbon technologies, right?
Right.
One classic example is every one of us have got at least one or two or three ACs in our homes. Now, each
Mm.
of these ACs are not going to be that much. Their service every year, right?
Yeah.
We have this notion that you have to, before the summer season comes in, you need to have a servicing. But
Servicing done.
exactly, and you are causing more harm, and it is that technician who will always advise you to refill the gas. You know
Yeah.
what, if your gas is 50% exhausted and 50% is already there, you're exhausting again, you are drying out that 50% in no time, which you would have done probably in a season's time, and then trying to refill it and
Yeah.
then doing it. So amount of carbon emission which went off is double because of just a service kind of technicality, which we think is a notion, which is not, right?
Right.
And it has been done not just by the communities who are not having basic level of education. All of
Mm.
us who we treat ourselves privileged to have a lot of education, a lot of fancy degrees, a lot of fancy education, a lot of dinner table conversations we do about geopolitics and all, we also commit that mistake. And that's a suicidal mistake that we commit. What are we doing then? If
Mm.
each AC is pumping out double the amount of
Carbon emissions.
gases, the GHG gases, chlorofluorocarbons, um, the carbon emissions are being put out, how much of impact is it going to be having in our societies, right? There
True.
was a study that came in very recently, a very pilot study. I cannot quote the evidence or the robustness of that study, but it's a very generic indicator. There are two hamlets within South Delhi. One is Mahipalpur, the other one is Vasant Kunj. Vasant Kunj has got a lot of greenery. There are two biodiversity parks out there, and then there is one what is called as Mahipalpur, clustered hamlet of houses built on the walls of each other. You can
Hmm.
literally sneak in from one house to the other,
Yeah.
जैसे मोहल्ले और गलियां होती हैं. So that's where. And once you start mapping it, 42-degree was the ambient temperature in Mahipalpur area,
Hmm.
vis-a-vis to Vasant Kunj, when you had larger greenery, and the houses also had ACs, almost double the ACs of what Mahipalpur has, because here elites kind of bring
Yeah.
in those three to four, the demand and supply, right? We always
Correct.
have that greediness in terms of having five ACs in our house, even though we need to, right?
Hmm.
And we are emitting, right? And the temperature was 37 degrees there, ambient temperature. That's where the concept of microclimate comes in. You will have to boil it down into the clusters. How how is my society going to be impacted by those? Can I build more, plant more trees? Can I have more kind of solutions coming in into that, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
where the solutions are going to come in, and we have got enough examples, best cases. Andhra Pradesh does something called a school roof policy.
Hmm.
They have a mandatory school roof policy, but and to my understanding, cool roof policy is not an innovation. It has been India's way of life. Go back to our villages, you will always find the composite materials through which our roofs were made, which could withstand summers, which could withstand winters, which could also withstand rains, right? And on top of it, you never had air conditioners or coolers required. It's just a fan which would do it. And even if there
Yeah.
is no fan, you just sleep in the open, and you will have enough
Yeah.
of cool breeze coming in, right?
That's true.
And you'll still have a very sound sleep. But now,
Yeah.
even in ACs, we don't have sound sleep coming in together.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the problems have changed. I think what has changed in the last few decades, I mean, I would say maybe 4, 5 decades, is largely the climate itself, and the implications of them are felt very differently in different regions. And when you mention that there's this problem of the top-down approach. That is okay. At the national level, you have 2070 as a target, but in the micro clusters, how do we have to deal with that? I think that is where your work is pointing to. That is how
Yeah.
do we bring changes on ground. But again, I mean, when you carry out an exercise of this magnitude, the amount of data that you might require would be immense. I mean, when you say the KPIs are around 163, but so tell me this, Abinash, what are the major challenges that you face while you carry out an exercise of this magnitude?
Okay, this might become another headline, Roshan, from this conversation. A lot of people complain about data.
Hmm.
Sorry, I beg to differ, and I have been a firm believer that we have a lot of data. What we often miss is we don't collate those data. Those data are lying in siloed, and
Right.
those data are lying somewhere in some racks and kind of work modules, right? And that's where it went. We go wrong. And
Hmm.
when you have as strong as um, I mean, as magnanimous as 163 odd indicators, you need to draw lessons from our largest exercises. Census exercise in India is the massive exercise,
Massive.
and we never rely on those data. We
Hmm.
never rely on those terms. Now, then, on top of it, once you have got some synchronized data, if you have to normalize them, use some of these cutting edge technologies to normalize, to correct your biases, you will have a very clearer picture. All right.
Hmm.
Now tell me, everything is an approximation. Climate modeling is also an approximation. All of us have got those approximations, but still, and life in general is also about
Broad
approximation.
approximation.
Yeah. So when approximation is the basis, if you are an approximate value of whether taking two paracetamols or three paracetamols for 104, that is also, and the doses of medicines that you eat is
Yeah.
also based on approximations, then why do you have to make a 100% foolproof
Hmm.
indicator or index? make it a 92%. People will still understand that indicator. It will give them a picture. Then in the second phase, try to make it 100% or 95%, right?
Right.
That should be the approach of looking at it, because in terms of making a robust indicator or robust assessment, what we end up is not even getting started.
Right.
My policy or my philosophy is, please get started. Once you
Things
start
will follow.
collecting, and things will move on, data will come in, then it's a work in progress, right? And
Right.
when you're attempting something first of its kind, there will be n number of permutation combinations, and that permutation combination, I'm not saying one size fits all, but at least that permutation combination will give you some sort of near value approximation, and that is enough. Because anything, as I said, any decision we take in life is based on approximations, and put that approximation explicitly that, boss, if climate readiness is saying that today Gujarat is one of the most climate ready, then boss, a lot of work need to be done in Gujarat. This is the indicator where it is saying, this is what it is not saying. And please, the God lies in the detail, so as the devil lies in the detail. So
In
you
the
need to
detail.
be very cognizant of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, a very contradictory opinion when you say that a lot of data exists in this country, and I also agree on that because the census, perhaps in India, is one of the largest exercises that has been carried out across the globe, right? 140 crore people door to door getting those numbers, it's itself is a big deal, and this data, as you rightly mentioned, might be across different departments, but collating them is itself a bigger challenge. And then kudos to you and your team that you managed to put information together, and it is always not about correctness, perhaps approximation, but how close can you go to that correctness is always going to be question. Abinash, tell me this, I mean, when you look at the recent index results, which states have surprised you positively or negatively, and why?
Mm. I don't want to. One of the questions when we were presenting this idea to some of the nodal ministries on climate readiness, we were told a very blatant statement. We were asked that there are enough indicators, enough indices lying in the space. Please don't create another index which compares states, and there is some sort of ambiguity which stalls the action. Right?
Mhm.
States are not going to say it. I said, we are not making climate laggard index. We are making climate readiness index. So
Yeah.
no state is a loser. No state is a winner, right?
Hmm.
Because the problem that we are dealing with is massive, and there is no size fit all. Some of the states that surprised me and have been surprising is my home state, Odisha.
Odisha.
1999 super cyclone, 10,000 people lost their lives.
Mhm.
Um, 2019, one intensity below cyclone had hit, and there were roughly single digit casualties in form of number of lives that was lost. They build back better this time, 2019. Electricity came back home in ideally 5 day time frame.
5 day.
5 day, which took 2 months in 1999.
Right.
Cleanup of the basic services or restoration of airports, railways was uh, almost 24 hours to 48 hours time frame. That's what readiness is all about, right?
Hmm.
You know what you're dealing with, and you better be ready in terms of facing it within the face and building yourself back. The other places where I see a lot of surprises is Andhra Pradesh. Very forward thinking, but we have got huge finances not been pulled in. Uh, and that's where the question comes down that we can't rely only on public money. We need to have a blending of finances, and that blending has to happen in public private philanthropy. And that's where the finances are required in terms of reprioritizing. A third
Right.
is a state like Maharashtra, which also
Mhm.
surprised me to a larger extent. A lot of finances are there, but right kind of technology, right kind of hyper granular policy are still yet to be kind of mainstreamed in that
Yeah.
particular state. Gujarat, again, a right amount of technology was there, a
Hmm.
right amount of finances are there, but we need to go one step up in a state like Gujarat, where you need to have low carbon policies for industry clusters. You need to have low carbon policies or action plans for particular sector for supply chains, right?
Hmm.
And what is been given, and then comes down the question of cap and trade. What is enough? Because as a private entity, I will always try to optimize my profit. I'll always to generate more revenue, but what is required is how much of money is required in terms of pulling that action.
Right.
And that's where some of these states, and let me tell you, Roshan, our team is working in terms of downscaling it at a district level, right?
Okay.
No state is similar to that. Within one particular state, you will find every district and its action,
Yes.
its readiness, its vulnerability are different.
Yeah.
Similarly, every state is different, and I'm sure if at some point of time we have got that robustness in data and we go down into the cluster levels of villages and blocks, probably we'll have a different story, because India's
Yeah.
story is different to that of its states, to that of its district, to that of its blocks and villages. So that
Yeah. I mean,
story.
the more granular that you become with this entire analysis of data, perhaps the information would be that much more uh, specific to that very region, right? And that's where perhaps the game becomes action on ground.
Absolutely. And without driving on ground action, all of these fancy indices, so as ours, are not going to help anyone.
Yeah.
At least it is not going to help Bharat in becoming Viksit Bharat
Yeah.
and Atmanirbhar, right? So
Absolutely.
these indices are
Uh,
very good, but that
absolutely.
complexity needs to be checked.
Very, very true. Very true. Abinash, tell me this. I mean, when you overlay the vulnerability with the new readiness scores, when you overlay them, what patterns are you seeing? Are the most vulnerable states also the least ready, or do you see otherwise now?
It's a mix, because India, as I said, is a combination of 10 states and 7 union territories, but at the same time 738 districts, and that's where the question becomes very complex. There is no linear pattern in terms of how the growth trajectory has been, how the low carbon technological adoption has been, how climate ready, or rather than climate ready, I would rather say how much of climate conscious or aware are we, right? That still needs to be done, because a lot of, and this dates back to our way of living. And I think out of all of these, India has done the fabulous work in terms of championing because of climate action on ground. Fabulous work in terms of policies, announcements. That political wheel is massive. Of all of them, I think Mission Life stands out to be one of the bestest, in fact, if you have to use it in terms of that, the narrative or the policy shift that it is intended to do, because it is trying to make us go back to our roots of how do we state, right? Because there is no point if it is 45 degrees outside, I
Yeah.
set my air conditioner to 20 degrees and have a blanket. What is the point of having a blanket in a summer? I mean, this is so ridiculous an idea, right? But still, we are adapted to that kind of idea, and that's how we live, because we
Yeah.
need a comfortable life. But India, if you look at it from different lens, is a different story altogether.
Yeah.
India's story of vulnerability and readiness from a gig worker point of view or e-commerce sector is different to that of a manufacturing, to that of a medical practitioner, to that of all of us in the
Yeah.
developmental sector working around. So, and that what lens and what sunglasses are you putting on, and what number is it? That's going to be very important, and what needle you are trying to move at what time is
Yeah.
important.
I'm pretty sure that the real estate moguls are going to look at this data very closely and maybe use it as a thing to sell real estate. I believe the regions in India which have the lowest vulnerability and the best readiness, perhaps is the real estate. I mean, do you see those questions being asked to you?
A lot of questions have been asked to us in terms of readiness, but one work that we always do, and IPE Global has been championing it. If you are taking any approximation, that approximation needs to be put out explicitly,
Yeah,
right? Then the number of questions which have been bombarded will be always lesser, right? We never claim that climate readiness index is a perfect index, but
yeah,
it is a near perfect index which will help you in taking more um, risk informed decisions, and that's where it is important, right? So every time we don't need to be having a 100% efficient
correct.
thermometer to measure the temperature. All you
Yeah,
need is what is the approximation.
yeah,
And in physics terms, if you take it, only idle machines are 100%, and we are living
yeah.
in a non-idle world. So
It's more of a probability based
yeah,
approach. Absolutely. The topic is so complicated that when you look up, I mean, so there are so many reports that are being published on an everyday basis now. And then for a layman or even for a business leader, going through these many reports is overly confusing. And now, what it has led to, I mean, what initially started as a TCFD or a BRSR reporting, all of this has become now like a checklist, not something that leads to something more meaningful. And that's the intention of decoding the real essence of each of these terminologies. Because when you talk about vulnerability or readiness, I think each of this has an implication on business in real value, right? So let me ask you this question. So when you run this diagnostic on Indian states, what are the most common failure modes? You mentioned Maharashtra and Odisha having a strong policy architecture but lacking implementation technology, while Gujarat has a technology that needs innovative finance. What's causing this structural mismatch, and why isn't the market correcting for it?
I think this structural mismatch is largely because we are trying to bucket everything. We are trying to look at it from one lens, and that's where we are going wrong. Um, it's India is one country, but let's also acknowledge the diversity. The diversity is
Right.
not just in languages or culture or the food we eat or the living styles or the lifestyles, but it is also with the complexity of the problems, how we address.
Mhm.
Let's not try to have blanket cover solutions towards it. Every district is distinct, every block is distinct, every village is distinct, and the solutions have to be distinct. The more hypergranular we go, and that is why we already have a policy structure. We just don't have just one form of kind of a policy structure available, where the prime minister only rules every state. You also have at state level chief ministers, then at district level you have got district magistrates, right? And then at village level you have got village councils. So you have those tiers of governance structures already available, but how each governance structure is responding to some of these risks which are existential is a different question. are
Mm.
they are they enough aware enough, right? And what are we trying, from a 30,000 feet, in terms of top to bottom approach? Are we empowering them in terms of understanding what is the solution, right?
Yeah.
Imagine a problem of agriculture, right? Modernization in agriculture is always talked of, and India has been practicing agriculture and different forms of agriculture way from an ancient period. But we modernized it because we
Mm.
could see the benefits. Similarly, if you integrate climate consciousness, if you integrate climate awareness, if you integrate climate empirical evidence on climate proofing of sectors, villages, blocks, and districts, then I think that is an economic story. This is not a climate story. And the moment
Right.
we start breaking the climate story into an economic or a development story, I think that marriage is still missing. We are still looking at silos, and that's where we are fundamentally going wrong with any of these architectures of system, technology, or finance.
Right. So stop looking at this entire issue of climate from the lens of silos. Rather, again, take the systematic system approach there. Right. Let me now ask you one last question from the angle. If you were to communicate this to a chief minister or a finance minister of a state, uh, how would you translate the index into three actionable priorities for the state? Let's say if a state has to get things right, what would be those three top priorities that you would recommend or communicate to this head of state?
How do the finances in a home operate? The
Mm.
finances of a home operates in a revenue and expenditure, right? If it's a state, then they have got their revenue streams, they also have their expenditure. That will boil us down in terms of not we telling them, but they know it, which are the sectors which are generating more revenue. Some states will have tourism, some states will have agriculture, some states will have manufacturing as the primary sectors. Start low decarbonizing these sectors.
Mm.
And if you're decarbonizing, don't tell me that it's a moral imperative. It's an economic imperative. If you do it, you're generating more jobs, you are pushing the growth agenda, and overall, it is a sustainable narrative which has been built in, which is probably making us more Viksit. So that's the only communication you need to tell them, with hard facts. Unfortunately, those hard facts have been muddled, those questions aren't been put in, and then the policies, the goalposts shift from one to the other. You need to fix the goalpost first, then only you can hit the goal. If your
Mhm.
goalpost is shifting, then you can never hit your goal.
Yeah. So, I mean, can you give an example, maybe picking a specific state, let's say a state like Maharashtra, where automotive may be the most promising or the revenue generating state, for example. So, if you were to, give this recommendation to the chief minister of Maharashtra, what would your recommendation be? Okay, you pick the sector which is the most profitable or revenue generating, and start decarbonizing them. Would that be something that you would recommend?
Well, it's not that difficult, Roshan, because the states have their own kind of agendas
Hmm.
in terms of implementing decarbonization pathways, right? What we should do, or what I do, or my team does at IPE Global, what we try to do is we act as catalyst. And as catalyst, what we do is you are 100 is required, you are already doing 80. That
Hmm.
20% increment, if you do it, this is what is going to happen. That is where the blending is going to happen. Like you gave me an example, asked me about automobile sector. So automobile sector has been of late looked more from a carbon emitting sector, right? In all forms, the carbon footprint is quite higher. But the moment you start plugging in the sustainability component, not just as a checklist, but also as a revenue upstream, right?
Right.
What kind of subsidy, what kind of green kind of standards are we putting in if you are doing the decarbonization by this time frame and mandating them compulsorily? Then I think the actions have to be made. So all you have to do is you put down those monitoring in place. Once you put down those monitoring, you'll see what actions are already been mandated. They are just strict adherence are required, and hence if you do that, what is the additional revenue stream that's going to come down? So every time we look at this problem more from an angle where somebody gains and one loses, you have to
Yeah.
make it a win-win conversation where the
Yeah.
state
Not
also
a not a zero sum game.
exactly, not a zero-zero sum game. So that's where the mismatch has been, right? For automobile
Hmm.
sector, if this happens, okay, we all agree it's not going to happen overnight in 5 years time scale, but can we do it 2060 if India has to become 2070, right?
Yeah.
Then do a backtracking of what has to be achieved each year, right?
Yeah.
So that's how. I mean, sorry for decoding it and simplifying it into very, very palatable format, but I think that's the need of the hour.
Absolutely. I mean, it sometimes feels to me that India is giving out mixed signals because I'm just talking about the current situation of the West Asia war. We have a high dependence on the crude oil part, where the transportation sector is heavily dependent on that, right? So the clear objective should be to switch to EV. I mean, at least as a solution or part solution to this problem there, right? So on one side you would have, I mean, you're asking the citizens to purchase more EV as an option for your commute. But at the same time, Yeah, and of course, yes, you have a GST of 5%, which is far less than an IC engine thing. But at the same time, you're giving mixed signals by increasing road taxes on that, right? So I sometimes feel that you have a state like Karnataka, which previously did not have a road tax. Now, when there is a situation, I think we could have pushed for more EV sales, but at the same time, when you're adding a road tax on top of that, that is giving mixed signals out that okay, I mean the government should have subsidized that very option. Don't you think so?
I'm not a huge fan of subsidies. The moment you are giving a subsidy, you are trying to bribe in a different
Hmm.
way, right? It's like a kid trying to cry, and you are trying to stop him by giving a chocolate or a toffee, right? So please don't do that. Make the kid understand why he or she should not cry. And that's where sectors need to be atmanirbhar. Number one. Number two, you gave the example of EV, but at the same time, often we also miss out where is the power coming down into that EVs. We are
Yeah, yeah,
burning
that
more
is true.
coal, right? So those kind of end-to-end circular pathway needs to be first mapped and then communicated in a way. Second is also while we are saying that Bharat is becoming aspirational, its citizens are also becoming double aspirational, right?
Hmm.
Our purchasing power parities have improved. We all want a much relaxed, better, environmentally non-sustainable life but comfortable life, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, there is a huge demand and supply mismatch. If there are 10 vehicles required, and if you mandate only EV, there's not enough supplies which are coming in. Do you want people? Now then question comes into public infrastructures. Do we have enough public infrastructure which can cater to that demand and supply, to that footprint of commuters, right? um, on top of it, we often tend to forget that we are a populous country, and
Hmm.
when you are populous, if you have got one apple to be shared among five brothers, then you will have to make it try to become more equitable without ending up in making anyone feeling more hungrier than the other,
Yeah.
right? So that equitability in terms of managing the aspirations is also very difficult. And
Hmm.
I'm not trying to take now the whole conversation around Cockroach Janta Party is also going on, the aspirations around Gen Z and others. I'm not trying to fantasize what political parties have been doing of late. In a very apolitical way, they're also having a tough time. So the people sitting down in the political chairs, in the governance chairs, in the executive chairs, and trying to run the country, state, and districts are having a tough time, right? They're
Yeah.
trying to fix one, the other problem pops in. By the time the other problem looks like under
There is
control,
one more waiting for you.
there are 10 more in the pipeline, right? And that's a difficult situation to be in. So,
True.
I think what we have missed out as a country is we have always looked at a banded approach rather than trying to heal the whole wound. We have always tried to put down a bandit. Yesterday it was education, today it is defense, tomorrow maybe it would be energy, right?
Yeah.
So it's a bandit approach what we have gone, and as a result, we haven't been able to heal any of our wounds, whether it is education, health, or kind of manufacturing or jobs, right? That
Yeah.
banded approach needs to shift. We need to look at permanent healing solutions. And I think the sooner we start that, we are already in the path, but we need to first track it because the devil that lies in the room or the big elephant is becoming more harsher, more incessant, more erratic,
Yeah.
and more is pushing us back.
True. True. The scale of the problem that we are addressing is quite huge, and we are running on a strict timeline that makes it that much more difficult. So much effective and much prudent policies needs to be set in place for things to move faster, quicker. Avinash, thank you so much for your time. I think we have only managed to cover half of what we initially set out to discuss. So I mean, what we've covered so far is one, the reason that you got into this very field, and started working with providing solutions and looking at data. Trying to first set up the vulnerability index, on top of that the readiness index, and looking at three core silos of measuring each of the states. And we also looked at a bit of solutions around that, and what states or head of states have to be mindful of while taking calls. But there is a lot more to discuss in this area, that is predominantly the solutions around, and how states can make use of this data to be much more effective and be a lot granular with the solutions, so that actions happen on ground. But Abinash, thank you so much for your time. We'll definitely have the part to record it. I think it is vital that we discuss that and get into the nitty gritties of solutions to the very problems that we just spoke in this very episode.
Thank you, Roshan. And always fascinating to have these kind of conversations where we are trying to discuss about gamut of things happening around. And on top of it, so many things are going on. A lot of noise is there. You need to cut the clutter. And
Yeah.
thank you for doing this and having me. It was pleasure indeed in terms of having this conversation. Looking forward to this conversation, many more conversation, and wishing you all the best for being the real sustainability mafia.
Thank you, thank you for that, so for those kind words, Abhinash. So, to our listeners, if today's conversation has sparked a question, an idea, or a realization about where your organization stands or where your state stands in this transition, I want you to do two things. First, connect with Abhinash and the incredible team at IPE Global. You can find them on www.ipeglobal.com. Second, if you're a business leader who knows that your sustainability journey needs structure, rigor, and a strategic partner who understands both science and boardroom, reach out to us at Carbon Mandal. We help organizations translate climate ambition into carbon accountability through ESG strategy, carbon accounting, sustainability reporting, and transitioning planning. Because in this race to Vikasat Bharat 2047, the companies that will lead are the ones that start measuring and managing their climate impact today. This has been the Carbon Circle. I'm Roshan Rai, and we will see you in the next honest conversation. Thank you so much.